My daughter's husband called me senile, so I let him sign the wrong documents. The notary pressed her embossed seal into the paper with a soft crunch, and Derek smiled at me the way you might smile at a child who has finally stopped crying. He slid the folder back across the mahogany table, tapped it twice with his knuckle, and said, "There we go, Pops, all done. Nothing to worry about." I nodded slowly, folding my hands on my lap. The notary packed her kit, thanked us both, and let herself out. Derek stood and stretched, rolling his shoulders like a man who had just finished something difficult. He glanced at his phone, already half gone. "Appreciate you being reasonable about this," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Sarah and I will make sure everything's taken care of. You won't have to think about it anymore." I watched him leave, heard the front door close, listened to his car start in the driveway. Then I waited another 10 minutes before I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were steady. The folder Derek had taken contained quitclaim deeds and transfer authorizations, all of them accurate, all of them notarized. None of them mine. He had just signed over his own portfolio to a revocable trust I controlled. That afternoon, I sat in the house I bought 42 years ago and let the stillness settle. The rooms no longer echoed the way they had after Margaret died. The walls had absorbed the quiet, and I had learned to live inside it. I did not need much. I had my routines, my books, the garden out back where I grew tomatoes and basil every summer. I did not think of myself as old, but I had stopped pretending I was not. My daughter Sarah used to visit on Sundays. She would bring pastries from the bakery on Laurel Street and sit at the kitchen table while I made coffee. We would talk about small things, her work at the consulting firm, my plans to repaint the shed, whether the neighbor's oak tree was going to drop branches again this winter. Then she married Derek, and the visits became less frequent. When they did come, Derek came with her, and the air in the house changed. Derek was 34, which made him 12 years younger than Sarah. He had the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no by anyone who mattered. He worked in finance, spoke often about markets and liquidity, and had a habit of resting his hand on Sarah's shoulder in a way that looked affectionate but felt like ownership. I did not like him, but I did not say so. Sarah seemed happy, or at least committed, and I had learned long ago that you cannot protect your children from their own choices. The trouble began 4 months before the notary visit. I'd been in the garage looking for a wrench when Derek walked in and found me staring at the pegboard where my tools hung. I knew the wrench was there. I could see it, but I had paused to decide whether I needed the adjustable or the fixed set, and the pause had stretched long, enough that Derek noticed. "You okay, Pops?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Fine," I said. I took the adjustable wrench and turned back to the workbench. "You sure? You were just kind of standing there." I was thinking. He nodded slowly, the way you nod when you are pretending to believe someone. Right. Thinking. A week later, I forgot to return Sarah's call until the next morning. When I did, she sounded concerned. Derek had told her I seemed confused in the garage. She asked if I was eating well, if I was taking my medications, if I had considered setting reminders on my phone. I told her I was fine, that I had simply been distracted. She did not sound convinced. After that, Derek started testing me. Small things at first. He would mention a date and then ask me to repeat it 10 minutes later. He would move items in the kitchen and watch to see if I noticed. Once, he called me from Sarah's phone and pretended to be a contractor asking about a roof repair I had never requested. When I told him I had not hired anyone, he laughed and said, "Just checking, Pops, just checking." I began to see what he was building. It was a narrative, assembled carefully over weeks. The confused old man who could not remember conversations, who lost track of time, who needed someone to step in before he hurt himself or made a terrible mistake. I could have confronted him, but I knew better. Derek was the kind of man who did not retreat when challenged. He doubled down. He made you the problem. So I decided to give him what he wanted. I started leaving cabinets open. I would ask Sarah the same question twice in one visit. I missed a dentist appointment and told Derek I had written it down wrong. He began to look at me differently, not with cruelty exactly, but with the flat patience of someone managing a liability. Sarah noticed too. She started calling more often, asking if I needed help with bills, if I had thought about hiring someone to check in during the week. I told her I was managing, but I let my voice waver just enough to plant doubt. The property became the center of it. The house sat on 2 acres at the edge of town, and the land had appreciated steadily over the decades. Margaret and I had bought it when the area was still mostly farms, and now developers circled every few years with offers that climbed higher each time. I always refused. The house was not an investment. It was the place where I had raised my daughter, buried my wife in the garden under the cherry tree we had planted together, and built a life that meant something. Derek started talking about the property 3 months ago. He framed it as concern. The house was too much for me to maintain, he said. The stairs were a fall risk. The yard was too large. What if something happened and no one found me for days? He suggested I sell, move into a managed community, let him and Sarah handle the proceeds. When I said I was not interested, he smiled and said we would talk about it. Later, when I was thinking more clearly, that phrase, thinking more clearly, as if my refusal was evidence of confusion rather than decision. 2 weeks later, Sarah mentioned that Derek had been researching power of attorney options. She said it gently, like she was asking permission, but the infrastructure was already being built. I knew that if I resisted directly, I would become the obstacle. They would move forward anyway, armed with documentation of my lapses, my missed calls, my open cabinets. So I stopped resisting. I leaned into the role Derek had written for me. I started calling Sarah by her mother's name once or twice per conversation. I left the stove on low after making tea. I asked Derek if he had met my daughter yet, right in front of Sarah. His eyes lit up each time. He was collecting moments, and I was handing them to him. The notary appointment came together quickly after that. Derek told me he had arranged for someone to help me organize my estate documents, just to make sure everything was in order. He said it kindly, the way you speak to someone who might forget what you said 5 minutes later. I agreed without hesitation. Sarah hugged me before they left that night and whispered that she was proud of me for being so open to help. I told her I trusted her. I spent the next week preparing. The work was not difficult, but it required precision. I'd kept my own financial records for decades, and I understood the systems well enough to know where the levers were. I contacted my attorney, a man named Richard Hollis, who had handled Margaret's estate and knew me as meticulous and sound. I explained what I needed and why, and he listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You're certain about this?" he asked. "Completely. And you understand the risks if this goes wrong?" "I do." He sighed, but he agreed. Over the next 3 days, we assembled the documents, quitclaim deeds that appeared to transfer the house and land into a family trust, but actually conveyed Derek's investment portfolio into a revocable trust I controlled. Transfer authorizations for accounts that did not belong to me, but matched the formatting and language Derek would expect to see. Everything was legal, everything was notarized, and everything depended on Derek not reading what he signed. The trick was not in forging anything, it was in letting Derek believe he was the one in control. I knew he would not read the documents carefully. Men like Derek do not read. They skim. They trust their assumptions. They see an old man, a notary, a stack of official-looking papers, and they see a transaction that has already been won. The morning of the signing, I dressed slowly and made myself tea. I left the mug on the counter and forgot to drink it. When Derek arrived, I answered the door in my slippers and asked him if he was the man from the city about the water bill. He smiled, corrected me gently, and guided me inside. The notary arrived on time. She was professional and efficient, the kind of person who has done this 1,000 times and no longer registers the details. Derek had chosen her, which meant she had no prior relationship with me. She asked for identification, confirmed the documents matched the instructions she had been given, and proceeded without questions. I played my part. I nodded when Derek explained what we were signing. I squinted at the pages as if the text were hard to read. I asked the notary if I needed to use my full name or just my first. Derek answered for me, his hand resting briefly on my shoulder. The notary worked through the stack, flipping signature pages, applying her seal, dating each one. Derek signed quickly, his pen moving with the confidence of someone who had already decided how this would end. When it was done, the notary thanked us and left. Derek stood, stretched, and made his comment about me not having to worry anymore. I nodded and watched him leave with the folder. I gave him 4 days. On the 5th day, I received a phone call from Richard Hollis. Derek had contacted him, furious and confused. He had taken the documents to his own attorney, who had informed him that the quitclaim deeds transferred his brokerage accounts and property holdings into a trust he did not control. The trust documents named me as both grantor and trustee, with Sarah listed as a contingent beneficiary upon my death. Derek owned nothing that he had signed away. I owned everything he had tried to take. "He is threatening to sue," Richard said calmly. "He claims you defrauded him." "Did I?" "No, every document was reviewed and signed with a notary present. He had the opportunity to read what he was signing. He chose not to." "What does he want?" "He wants the transfers reversed. He wants you to admit you deceived him." "I thought about that." "Tell him I am happy to meet and discuss it." The meeting took place in Richard's office the following week. Derek arrived with his attorney, a sharp woman in her 40s who looked at me like I was the opponent in a trial she had already prepared for. Sarah came too, sitting beside Derek, her face pale and tight. She would not look at me. Richard laid the documents on the table. Derek's attorney went through them, page by page, confirming what her client had signed. She asked if I had misrepresented the contents. Richard said no. She asked if Derek had been coerced. Richard said no. She asked if I had taken advantage of Derek's assumption that I was mentally impaired. My client, Richard said evenly, was under no obligation to correct Mr. Hayes' assumptions about his cognitive state. Mr. Hayes initiated the signing, selected the notary, and proceeded without requesting independent legal review. At no point did my client make any fraudulent statements. Derek leaned forward. "You lied." "I did not," I said. "You pretended to be senile. You decided I was senile. I simply did not argue." His jaw tightened. Sarah looked at me then, her eyes wet. "Dad?" "Why?" "Because he was trying to take my home. We were trying to help you." "No," I said. "He was trying to help himself." The room went silent. Derek's attorney made notes on her pad, then looked up. "Mr. Hayes is willing to return the assets if your client agrees to certain terms." I shook my head. "No." Richard glanced at me, then back at her. "My client is not interested in returning the assets. However, he is willing to discuss a settlement." The terms were simple. Derek would sign a document acknowledging that he had attempted to manipulate me into signing over my property under false pretenses. He would relinquish any claim to my estate, now or in the future. In exchange, I would return his portfolio, minus the legal fees and costs I had incurred. If he refused, I would retain everything, and Richard would file a formal complaint with the state bar regarding Derek's conduct. Derek's attorney advised him to take the deal. He refused at first, insisting that he had been tricked, that I was not the confused old man I had pretended to be. Richard waited, then pointed out that the alternative was a public proceeding in which Derek would have to explain why he had tried to strip his wife's elderly father of his home without reading the documents he signed. He signed the settlement 3 days later. Sarah did not speak to me for 2 months after that. I did not push. I knew that whatever Derek had told her, it would take time for her to separate his version from the truth. When she finally called, her voice was small. "I did not know," she said. "I know. He told me you were getting worse. He said you needed help. I did not." She was quiet for a long time. Then she asked, "Are you angry with me?" "No. I should have known. I should have seen it." "You loved him," I said. "That is not a crime." She came to visit the following Sunday. She brought pastries from the bakery on Laurel Street and sat at the kitchen table while I made coffee. We did not talk about Derek. We talked about small things, her work, the garden, the shed I still needed to repaint. It felt like before, but quieter. And maybe that was better. Derek filed for divorce 6 weeks later. Sarah did not contest it. She moved into an apartment downtown and started seeing a therapist who helped her understand the ways she'd been shaped by someone who saw her as a tool rather than a partner. It was slow work, but she was doing it. I was proud of her. I returned Derek's portfolio as agreed, minus the fees. He moved to another state shortly after the settlement finalized. I heard through Sarah that he had taken a position with a firm in Texas where no one knew the story and he could start over. I did not think about him often. The house is still mine. I repainted the shed last spring, a soft gray that Margaret would have liked. The tomatoes came in strong this summer, and I made sauce that I jarred and gave to Sarah. She said it tasted like home. I do not think of myself as a victor in all this. I think of myself as a man who protected what mattered, using the only tools I had. Derek mistook patience for weakness, silence for confusion, and restraint for incapacity. He built a trap for me, and I let him walk into it instead. The notary seal is still visible on the settlement agreement, pressed into the paper with that same soft crunch. I keep it in a drawer in my study, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. The world is full of people who will test you, who will look for softness and call it frailty, who will mistake quiet for defeat. I am 68 years old, my hands are steady, my mind is clear, and I will not be moved.